Hey guys, tonight we're heading back, way back, to ancient Rome. Picture this, a stone atrium shimmering in afternoon light, the gentle splash of a fountain somewhere behind you, and the strong, unmistakable scent of burnt herbs, goat marrow, and vinegar. You're kneeling on a woven mat, squinting as a noblewoman dips a bronze brush into a thick greenish paste. It looks like swamp gunk, and you're expected to put that on your head. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. Let's see how global this sleepover really is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in the domus of a wealthy Roman woman. Let's call her Flavia, who is absolutely not going to tolerate her roots showing, even if it means sacrificing your scalp to the gods of fashion. She's perched behind you, muttering to her slave girl as the ingredients are stirred over a low fire in a small ceramic bowl. The dye itself? It's a mix of ashes, lead-based powder, vinegar, and possibly a pinch of charred leeches. You suppress a gag. This isn't L'Oreal, it's a gamble. One that might leave you radiant or bald. Or, in one famous case recorded on a funeral plaque, both. She dips her fingers in the bowl, smooths the mixture through your hair, and begins massaging it in with the firm pressure of someone used to being obeyed. The room smells like pickled metal and roasted bones. There's a joke somewhere in here about head cheese, but you try not to think too hard about it. Outside, the clang of iron against stone reminds you that Rome is never still. You're in the middle of a city obsessed with spectacle, from gladiators to gory plays to garish hair dye. And here you are, playing your part in it. As Flavia hums tunelessly and the paste begins to warm against your scalp, you realize that Romans didn't just color their hair for beauty. They dyed it to signal wealth, ethnicity, mood, even political allegiance. A woman going from dark brown to flashy gold might as well be screaming "new money" across the forum. A man darkening gray roots might be pretending he's still worth marrying. Historians still argue whether dyed hair was seen as authentic beauty or decadent nonsense. But clearly, it mattered enough for you to be sitting here, itchy, slightly woozy, and very much a prisoner of fashion. There's no mirror, but Flavia insists the green hue will fade once it sets. She's been wrong before. You spot a wig on a wooden stand in the corner, her just-in-case backup. Time slows as you sit still, careful not to scratch. The dye's warming now, not in a spa-like way. In a volcano lava way. Your eyes water. Maybe the leeches were still alive. Flavia, sipping watered wine, explains that in her youth, they used to soak dye in goat bile overnight. So much brighter, she sighs, but harder to wash out when you change lovers. You blink. She winks. From the corner of the atrium, her pet monkey, yes, she has one, gives a screech. Perhaps in solidarity. Hair dye wasn't new in her day. Romans had picked it up from Greeks and Egyptians, who'd been playing mad chemist with minerals and plants for centuries. But it was in Rome where things got theatrical. After all, this is a culture that once painted gladiator wounds with red ochre to make them look bloodier for the crowd. Your head starts to tingle, or throb. Flavia claps her hands, and another slave girl appears with a sponge soaked in warm milk. You're about to object when she starts dabbing your scalp. The milk helps seal the brilliance, she claims. Or maybe it's to cool the burning. Either way, it's soothing, sort of. You're not alone in this experiment. Roman frescoes show women with golden curls and raven black waves. Statues of gods and goddesses are often topped with stylized hair that would have required a serious beauty routine. Even Ovid, that cheeky poet, wrote about women who dye their locks, teasing them and admiring them in equal measure. One scroll even warns that some women change their hair color more often than they change their tunics. Sass level. Ancient. Flavia excuses herself to prepare her own dye bath. You catch a glimpse of her reflection in the bronze water basin. Underneath her pinned-up curls, tufts of faded copper hint at last week's hue. She's going darker today. Something somber, she mutters, in case my husband loses the Senate vote. Hair was more than vanity. It was strategy. For women, it could mean marriage prospects. For men, respectability. For courtesans, allure. And for the enslaved workers applying it, survival. You glance again at the girl tending the bowl. She looks no older than 15, her hands stained and raw from the chemicals. She doesn't speak, but her silence is louder than Flavia's chatter. Maybe that's what lingers more than the burn or the smell, the quiet cost of this beauty ritual. The labor, the danger, the unspoken power. Still, your hair is processing, and there's no going back. A bell rings from outside. Time to rinse. Flavia claps again, and you're escorted to a marble basin where cold water crashes over your head like judgment. Your scalp screams, but when the water clears, well, it's hard to tell. Your reflection is murky, but Flavia grins. Magnificent, she says. Just the right amount of scandal. You exhale. You made it. Probably. Somewhere in the distance, a parrot squawks. Ugly blonde, it cackles. Flavia narrows her eyes. That bird's going in the stew. Welcome to beauty in ancient Rome. It only gets weirder from here. You step outside into the Roman sun, scalp still tingling slightly, and instantly, you notice it. Hair. Everywhere. Blonde, copper, even shades of red so unnatural they'd make a fire look shy. The city doesn't just hum with voices and carts. It shimmers with artificial color. And you, freshly rinsed and still dripping, are part of the parade. Hair dye in Rome wasn't just a private affair. It was spectacle, a street-level fashion war. As you walk through the forum, squinting through light bouncing off marble columns, you start clocking the shades around you like a nervous pigeon watching breadcrumbs. There's a matron with a hairstyle so precisely sculpted and golden it probably has a support structure underneath. A younger woman flaunts deep black hair with a glossy finish that screams imported ingredients. Two courtesans laugh under shaded awnings, both with streaks of crimson woven through their curled wigs. Historians still argue whether hair dye colors in Rome were dictated by genuine preference or social signaling. But one thing is clear. There were trends, and they spread faster than a toga at a frat party. Blonde was big. Black was moody. Red was flirtatious. Brown was, well, let's just say nobody dyed their hair brown. That was the starting line, not the finish. You wander past a booth selling combs and hair oils, and the vendor gives your freshly dyed locks a long look. Gorgeous. Bit uneven on the left, he says, holding up a bronze mirror. He's not wrong. There's a patch that looks like a bruise made of mustard. But you nod politely and slink away. As you push through the crowds, the colors become a kind of coded language. A woman with bold, brassy blonde hair is trying to be seen, either rich or trying to seem it. A teenager with soot-black strands is likely imitating a gladiator or actress. A priestess with silvery white hair tied in strict braids is probably actually gray, but you wouldn't dare ask. Then there's the strange category of greenish hues, a side effect of certain rust or vinegar-based dyes going wrong. A fringe group of street performers have embraced it, turning the hair mold look into an avant-garde style. One winks at you. You keep walking. You turn a corner and spot a statue of Venus with delicately painted golden curls, probably added post-sculpture. A reminder that even gods weren't above a little color enhancement. There's something almost punk about it all. In a world without shampoo ads or Insta-filters, Romans still found a way to express themselves through their hair. And unlike modern dye that fades in 6 weeks, Roman concoctions could stain for months, or until your scalp rebelled and shed the whole thing like a bad idea. You settle on a public bench for a rest and glance around. There's a senator's wife fanning herself, her hair a rich auburn that probably came from oak gall and rust. You recognize the signs, slight discoloration on the temples, the way the color deepens toward the ends. She must have sat for hours. Probably made a slave girl cry. A young boy runs by, trailing a kite, and you notice his hair is streaked with orange. Not fashionable. Probably an accident. Maybe he got into his mother's stash. Or a prank. You smirk. Childhood chaos transcends centuries. Then you hear it. Laughter from a shaded portico. A group of women are pointing at a passerby whose hair appears to be 3 colors at once. You look closer. Blonde on top, black underneath, with what might be a reddish tinge around the crown. A failed experiment? A symbol of something? Or a deliberate ombre before it had a name? One of the women, wearing a stunning updo in sun-bleached yellow, leans toward her friend and mutters, "Probably used sewer water again." They giggle. You shudder. That's a thing. And speaking of weird methods, there's a group of traveling stylists by the bathhouse fountain. They're advertising their services by holding up dyed wigs and little clay pots of homemade dye. One calls out, "Guaranteed to hold color or your cow back." It's a joke, but not really. Livestock often served as bartering chips in the less moneyed parts of Rome. You wander over. One pot contains a mixture that smells like fermented wine and fish. Blonde booster, the vendor claims. Another smells of sulfur and damp linen. For dramatic flair, you ask what's in the red one. The vendor grins. Crushed roses, rust filings, and just a whisper of bloodroot. You decide you don't want to be dramatic that badly. Mainstream fact time. Roman society was layered like a lasagna. Class, gender, age, citizenship, and hair dye often signaled where you stood in that mess. Wealthy women could afford imported ingredients. Lower classes made do with soot or chalk. Foreign slaves brought new recipes. Soldiers came home with new styles. One emperor even tried to ban certain colors for anyone not of the senatorial class. The city was a palette, and your head was the canvas. But not everyone agreed on how tasteful it was. A philosopher passing by scowls at a group of women laughing over dye pots. He mutters something about vanity as the downfall of the republic. His robes are pristine white. His hair is suspiciously dark for his age. You draw your own conclusions. Later, as dusk sets in and the golden sunlight turns everything briefly cinematic, you notice that the vibrancy of the hair around you fades slightly. Not the dye, just the illusion. Without the harsh noon glare, colors mellow. A copper head glows softer. A black braid gleams like satin. A streaky disaster looks kind of cool, actually. You realize that in Rome, hair wasn't just for beauty. It was camouflage, power, identity, and a conversation you could hold without ever saying a word. Even now, as a cool breeze cuts through the warm air and a musician plays a sad tune nearby, you think your hair might still smell like vinegar and goat, but you're part of something. A tradition of humans doing bizarre, possibly harmful things in the name of self-expression. And tomorrow, when the sun rises and everyone walks back out into the open forum to be seen, judged, admired, and occasionally mocked, your head will be ready. Sort of. You wake the next morning with a pillow that smells faintly like vinegar and burnt walnuts. Your scalp has survived the night, tender but intact. But before you can yawn and stretch, there's a gentle knock at the wooden door, followed by a voice. The hair girl is ready. Oh, right. Maintenance. You shuffle across the tiled floor, stepping into a courtyard already buzzing with preparations. A slave girl, barefoot, expression neutral, waits by the stone bench with a wooden tray of combs, pins, and a reheated dye mixture. This is Ione. She's about 14 and apparently been up since dawn crushing flower petals and scrubbing rust from an iron pot. She doesn't speak much. Most of them don't. You sit quietly as she parts your hair, tugging gently, and begins reapplying a final coat of the dye to seal the color, as Flavia calls it. It's all done with efficiency and the sort of practiced stillness that comes from years of not wanting to be noticed. She doesn't meet your eyes, but you watch her fingers move with astonishing skill. She knows when to press, when to lift, when to pause. You imagine she's done this same process for dozens of others. Noblewomen, their daughters, perhaps even men preparing for a formal gathering. There's an entire hidden world beneath the surface of Rome's beauty, the labor of girls like Ione. Historians still argue whether these enslaved stylists were ever able to use their skills to gain status or freedom. Some inscriptions suggest that highly valued cosmeti, personal beauticians, could earn enough favor to be manumitted. But most remained in the shadows, working with dangerous chemicals and punishing hours, just to make their mistresses' heads shimmer in candlelight. As Ione leans in, you catch a whiff of her tunic, bitter herbs and ashes. Probably from the previous dye batch. She's stained to the bone with other people's vanity. And speaking of bone, literally, the comb she uses is made from it. Smooth from a sheep's rib, with teeth worn down in the middle from overuse. You feel it tug as she works in silence, occasionally dipping her fingers into a small pot of goat fat to slick down your frizz. The bench beneath you is cool. Birds flutter across the courtyard vines. But your scalp? It's heating again. You try not to wince. Ione glances up, just once, to check. She adds a bit more of the fat and murmurs, "It will pass." You blink. It's the first thing she's said. You nod. She nods back. Behind you, Flavia's voice rises. She's berating another slave for oversteaming a hair wrap. "Do you want me to look like a burnt fig?" she yells. You wonder how many hands like Ione's are at work in Rome right now. Hundreds? Thousands. Mixing chalk and ashes. Heating oils. Scraping ingredients from walls, tombs, and marketplaces. Turning everyday substances into fleeting beauty. Many with no training. Only inherited know-how passed through whispers and bruised fingers. A quirky tidbit for your morning. Some Roman stylists believed the best dye results came under a full moon. Others swore by the urine of red-headed boys under age 10. You try not to ask if Ione has used that one. Instead, you ask, quietly, if she likes doing hair. She shrugs. Better than floors. You nod. That checks out. In a way, she's an artist. A chemist. A caretaker. And yet no one outside this courtyard would know her name. They'd see your shining hair and compliment Flavia's taste. Or her wealth. Maybe her gods. But not the girl with scabbed knuckles who made it happen. You lean back slightly, trusting her grip as she starts working your hair into a twist. She spritzes it with rose water, probably the only thing on the tray that smells remotely pleasant, and begins pinning with bronze clasps shaped like leaves. She even adds a little curl at your temple. A flourish. Rome is full of women like her. Some born into servitude, some taken in war, some sold by desperate families. And while most citizens pretend not to see them, they're everywhere. At the baths, the temples, the markets, fixing hair, preparing dye, offering beauty like borrowed magic. It makes you wonder, who's the performance really for? In the end, even the wealthy women, the ones who pay or command others to beautify them, are still following a script. They wear the right shade, the right curl, the right signal of fertility, modesty, or seduction. Everyone is performing. Ione's just the one who sets the stage. As she finishes, you feel the weight of the pins settle, oddly comforting. She steps back, wipes her hands on a cloth that's permanently stained with the hues of other people's egos, and gives the slightest nod. Done. You stand. Your hair doesn't move. That's probably good. Before you can thank her, she's already gathering the tools, preparing for the next client. Maybe Flavia. Maybe her cousin. Maybe a guest you haven't met yet. All with different demands. But one shared truth. None of it happens without the girl with the goat-fat hands. You glance at the clay pot by the tray's edge. There's a line scored into the side, probably made by Ione, marking how much dye she needs each time. A small detail. A quiet rebellion of organization in a chaotic, scent-heavy world. As you leave the courtyard, hair shimmering in the sunlight like polished brass, a servant bows slightly. Radiant, he murmurs. You smile politely, but you think of Ione, and her stained fingers, and her silence, and how even the glossiest gold is laid strand by strand, by someone who will never be seen. By now, your hair has settled into a sort of crispy confidence. It no longer itches. The burn has faded to a warm hum. But what hasn't faded is the smell, a stubborn blend of vinegar, ashes, and something you're starting to suspect might be fermented animal. You can't quite place it, but it lingers like regret. You follow your nose, literally, down a narrow side street to a market stall hidden in the shadow of a crumbling aqueduct. Here, under a faded awning stitched with foreign script, is the source of Rome's secret beauty artillery, the dye merchants. The stall owner, an old Greek with ink-stained fingers and a cough that could shake a Colosseum, greets you without looking up. Here for color, or just the gossip? You blink. Color. He grins, revealing teeth as stained as his trade. Let me show you the best filth Rome has to offer. What follows is less a shopping experience and more a crash course in Roman chemistry. He pulls out a series of small jars, each sealed with wax and smelling worse than the last. This one, he says, holding up a jar of deep crimson paste, is made from madder root, crushed oak galls, and the rust scraped from temple gates. For red, passionate, divine, slightly unhinged. Next, he opens a pale powder. Burnt eggshells, vinegar, and dried white lead. Blondes swear by it. He shrugs, or they used to, until their scalps started peeling. You try not to gag. This, he says, tapping a greenish paste that smells like spoiled olives, is for the brave. Crushed leeches, boiled in wine, aged for 7 days. He lowers his voice. For jet black. Shiny, dangerous, possibly haunted. Historians still argue whether these recipes were based on scientific trial and error, or if some were just revenge disguised as beauty advice. Honestly, you're leaning toward the latter. The merchant laughs. There's a scroll in Alexandria that claims goat bile, when left out under the stars, grants a celestial sheen. He snorts. You know what goat bile grants? Nausea. He offers you a whiff. You decline. Politely. Behind him, a younger apprentice is grinding what looks like iron filings into a bowl of wine. For shine, he mutters. And courage. You raise an eyebrow. Oh yes, the old man says. The iron oxidizes. Just the right amount of alchemy to make you glow or explode. The line is thin. Apparently, Roman dye formulas were as unstable as their emperors. Some worked beautifully, others not at all, and a few resulted in hair loss, rashes, or, on at least 2 recorded occasions, a local fire. One quirky tidbit you learn. Roman women sometimes smeared pigeon dung into their hair, believing it would lighten it over time. Not just any pigeon dung, ideally from birds fed on figs. Why? Who knows? Probably the same logic that says snails help with wrinkles. You browse a bit more, running your fingers over labeled jars. Some are imported: Egyptian henna, Syrian indigo, Gaulish berry paste. Others are local blends, rumored to be based on Etruscan recipes rescued from tomb walls. You're pretty sure at least one of those was just painted red clay. The merchant shrugs when you ask. Everyone's trying to sell a miracle, but a little ash and oil goes a long way. He hands you a tiny vial of something labeled nightshade gold. This one's banned, he whispers. Very effective. Very permanent. But it made 3 noblewomen go mad. One started singing to her wig. The other thought she was a peacock. You decide to pass. There's something wonderfully Roman about this whole setup. The mixture of sophistication and superstition. The faith in potions. The open acceptance that beauty hurts, sometimes literally. You wonder how many of these recipes were passed down from grandmothers, or stolen from lovers, or scrawled in secret journals hidden beneath beds. You finally settle on a modest pot of ash and vinegar number 4, a safer formula according to the merchant. Only mild burning, he assures you, as if that's a feature. You pay with a small bronze coin, more than it's worth, and walk away, the jar heavy in your pocket. As you head back through the bustling forum, you spot a woman sitting near a fountain, crying quietly. Her hair is streaked with uneven green and purple. You sit nearby. She looks over and sniffs. Used my sister's dye recipe. She hates me. You nod. That tracks. Eventually, she laughs. It'll fade, she says, or I'll wear a veil for 6 weeks. In Rome, recovery from a dye disaster wasn't rare. People wore wigs, scarves, hooded cloaks. Some leaned into the chaos and invented new trends. A particularly bold performer once painted gold stripes into her black hair and declared herself a living zebra. She got 3 marriage proposals. The idea of perfection was slippery here. It was always about drama, transformation, control. As the sun lowers and shadows stretch across the street, you make your way home, your little jar in hand, and your scalp still gently radiating yesterday's ambition. And you realize, Rome wasn't trying to copy nature. It was trying to conquer it, one strand at a time. You return home just as the last of the sunlight slices across the tiled floor. Inside the atrium, Flavia is reclining on a cushioned bench, admiring her reflection in a handheld bronze mirror that gives everything a soft, wobbly glow, like looking at yourself through the bottom of a wine cup. She doesn't notice you at first. She's too busy inspecting her freshly dyed hair, now an ambitious shade somewhere between copper and gold. Satisfactory, she mutters, which, in Flavia speak, is a rave review. Then she spots the jar in your hand. Ah, she says, eyes twinkling. Trying out your own blend? Just don't use it on the dog this time. You weren't going to, but now you're curious what happened last time. You set the jar down, and as if on cue, a servant enters carrying a scroll. Flavia unrolls it with a flourish. Regulations, she says. They just passed another one. Apparently the Senate thinks we're too fashionable. You blink. What? She grins. There's a new ordinance regulating public displays of appearance for women under 30, and widows, and entertainers, and, she squints, women whose husbands earn less than 20,000 sestertii annually. She snorts, which is to say, everyone they dislike. Yes, the Roman Senate, between wars and grain imports, actually took time to legislate hair dye. Not officially by color, mind you, but by implication. They couldn't have citizens looking too fabulous lest they distract from their social standing. Historians still argue whether these laws were enforced or merely moral posturing, like the kind your grandmother made before the family photo. But the fact that they were written at all says plenty. Hair wasn't just fashion, it was politics. Flavia waves the scroll. Listen to this. Let no woman of disreputable standing dye her hair, so as to emulate the matrone of noble birth, nor permit herself to be adorned in foreign styles lest she be mistaken for higher class. She grins. Basically, poor women stay ugly. You sit beside her as she pours a goblet of wine and offers you one. It's all about control, she continues. They want to make sure you look like who you're supposed to be, not who you wish to be. You sip the wine. It tastes slightly like regret and boiled grapes. This wasn't the only kind of regulation either. There were also expectations, unwritten, but deeply embedded. Married women were supposed to keep a particular look. Courtesans another. Vestal virgins? Their hair had to be carefully braided, never dyed. Unless, of course, you wanted to be mistaken for a runaway actress. Some women obeyed the rules. Others found ways around them. Wigs. Imported dyes. Secret nighttime applications. A wealthy merchant's daughter once faked a religious pilgrimage just to sneak off and get her hair lightened in a Greek salon. You remember passing a magistrate's daughter earlier today, with hair dyed so violently red it nearly glowed. Maybe she didn't care, or maybe that was the point. And then there were the punishments. While not always formal, social shaming could be vicious. A satirical poet once wrote a scathing verse about a woman whose dyed hair matched the color of her shame. He never specified what that color was, but it probably wasn't flattering. You ask Flavia if she ever got in trouble. Oh, constantly, she says proudly. Once, I dyed my hair black and wrapped it in silver thread. A senator's wife fainted. They said I was impersonating a widow and a foreign priestess. I was thrilled. She chuckles, then adds more quietly. Of course, it was different when my husband was alive. He preferred me blonde. Said it made me look like a good Roman woman. Whatever that means. You both sip in silence for a moment. Then she smiles. Now I do what I like. You wonder if that's freedom or just a different kind of performance. Just then, her cousin bursts in. Her hair a chaotic tangle of pink-tinged curls, clearly still wet from a recent dye session. I did it, she shouts. I matched the shade of Pompeius wine jug. Flavia claps. You'll scandalize the entire dining hall. Perfect, her cousin beams. There's something contagious about it. The boldness. The deliberate ridiculousness of dyeing one's head to match pottery. It's not vanity, it's theater. Roman society may be obsessed with status, but within that rigidity, women are staging their own quiet rebellions. One batch of vinegar-stained goat hair at a time. A quirky bit you didn't expect. In some households, hair dye was a group activity. Friends would gather like modern-day spa nights. Except instead of face masks and Netflix, they were slathering pigeon dung on each other's scalps and reciting Catullus. Flavia gestures to the courtyard. You know, we should host a salon night soon. You'll love it. We all try to match a different god. Last time we did Bacchus. Wine everywhere. Hair everywhere. You imagine it now. A circle of noble women, shrieking with laughter, their heads dripping with weird concoctions as they impersonate drunken deities. The sheer absurdity of it makes you grin. But beneath the comedy is something real. These rules, these restrictions, are being bent, twisted, mocked. With every dye job that goes one shade too far, Roman women are reclaiming a little control over how they're seen, and how they see themselves. You lean back, staring at the ceiling where a mosaic of Diana, the huntress, looks down with a smug little smile. Her hair is gilded with gold tiles. Stylized, perfect. You wonder who decided gods had to be blonde. You wonder what dye they used for her. And as the wine starts to hit and your limbs relax, you realize, tonight, in this atrium full of rebellion and vinegar fumes, the Senate doesn't matter. Their scrolls are old. Their rules are soft. But the women here? Their hair is loud. It's the next day, and you're squinting into a polished bronze mirror, trying to decide whether your hair is intentionally golden or just slightly sunburned. Flavia walks by, tosses you a small fig, and says with a wink, "You'll need more than rust and vinegar if you want to go blonde the Roman way." She's right, of course. Because if there was one hair color that Rome couldn't get enough of, it was blonde. The ultimate status symbol, the not-so-subtle shout of wealth, desire, and foreign allure. And, unfortunately for most native Romans, utterly unnatural. You bite into the fig and listen as Flavia launches into a lecture, pacing in her sandals like a caffeinated professor. Going blonde, she says, used to mean you were Greek. Or a goddess. Then it meant you were from Gaul. Then it meant you were expensive. She stops. And now? It just means you have access to bird poop and patience. She's not kidding. The Roman obsession with blonde hair led to some creative solutions. The most common? Pigeon dung. Specifically fermented, sun-dried pigeon dung, mixed with a lightening agent, usually ashes, chalk, and vinegar, then applied to the hair and left to bake under the sun. You can already imagine the smell. And the flies. Flavia gestures to the jar sitting on the edge of the fountain. Imported from Germania, she says proudly. Those pigeons eat nothing but berries and acorns. Very luxurious. You lean closer. The jar does not look luxurious. It looks like something scraped off a cursed altar. You take a polite step back. Historians still argue whether the average Roman woman had access to these imported lightening treatments, or whether most had to settle for makeshift concoctions. Either way, the goal was the same, chasing that elusive golden glow. And if the dung didn't work? Wigs. Beautiful, gleaming blonde wigs made from the hair of enslaved Germanic women, often taken as war prizes. You reach into a carved chest nearby and pull one out. It's heavy, smooth, and vaguely unsettling. The texture is unmistakably real, because it is. Flavia explains matter-of-factly. Our soldiers bring them back by the cartload. Some are still braided. We wash them, of course. Of course, the use of blonde wigs wasn't just fashion, it was identity theft on a cultural scale. Roman women wore the hair of their enemies. Not metaphorically, literally. To look foreign, exotic, desirable, while simultaneously mocking or enslaving the very cultures they borrowed from. You lift the wig and try to imagine putting it on. It's a little too small. Or maybe your conscience is too big. Still, you can't deny the craftsmanship. These weren't slapdash hairpieces. Some were intricately curled, perfumed, and styled to mimic hairstyles seen in frescoes or statues. Entire industries emerged just to maintain them. Wig makers, curlers, perfumers, stylists who specialized in blending real and artificial strands. One quirky tidbit: the wealthiest women sometimes stored their wigs on mannequin heads carved to resemble Venus, goddess of beauty. So, in essence, they were practicing their glam routine on literal idols. Flavia calls for her cousin, who enters dramatically with her latest look, a towering, flaxen wig sculpted into loops and waves, pinned with pearls and tiny gold leaves. She looks like she's about to audition for a myth. You clap. She curtsies. But not everyone admired the blonde craze. Several Roman writers, mostly men, raged against it in poetry and prose. They called it fake, scandalous, a sign of loose morals. One even said that a woman who wore German hair must surely have German thoughts. You're still not sure what that means, but it sounds judgy. Even the philosopher Seneca once rolled his eyes at the hair obsession, writing that dyed locks and stolen scalps bring no wisdom. Harsh, but fair. And yet, the trend persisted. Because fashion rarely listens to philosophy. You follow Flavia to her dressing room, where a small mirror made of obsidian leans against the wall. In the corner, a basket holds 3 wigs in varying shades of blonde. She picks one up, brushes it gently, then pins it into place over her braided real hair. The transformation is instant. She's no longer a widow sipping wine. She's Venus reborn, with just a hint of bird droppings. It's a kind of armor, she says, catching your gaze in the mirror. People see this, she touches the wig, and they forget everything else. They think I'm young, innocent, playful, or dangerous. Whatever I want. You nod. You get it. In a city where appearance could determine your future, your marriage, your status, your safety, hair wasn't just decorative. It was tactical. And blonde. Blonde was the weapon of choice. Even prostitutes were required to dye their hair blonde in certain parts of the city, a rule designed to separate them visually from respectable women. Of course, this backfired when respectable women also wanted to look like goddesses, which led to the strange phenomenon of noble women wearing blonde wigs at home, but darker hair in public. Flavia's cousin laughs. It's a mess. A beautiful, scented, expensive mess. As the sun sets, she lights a small lamp and gestures for you to try one of the wigs. Hesitantly, you do. The sensation is bizarre. Slightly itchy. Weirdly empowering. In the mirror, you barely recognize yourself. Flavia beams. Now you look like trouble. You smile. Maybe you do. Later, as the oil lamps flicker and wine flows a little too freely, you realize the blonde trend isn't just about imitation. It's about possibility. Becoming someone else. Even if just for a night. And when you finally remove the wig, your scalp a little sweaty and your ego strangely inflated, you catch your reflection once more. Still you, but a little bolder. It's early morning, and a servant is trying to wrangle your curls into submission after your brief flirtation with the blonde wig. There's a tug, then a sigh, then the unmistakable sound of a comb snapping in two. You're about to offer help when Flavia strides in with a curious gleam in her eye and drops a heavy velvet bag on the table. Pick one, she says. You blink. Pick what? She opens the bag with theatrical flair. Out tumble half a dozen wigs. Real hair, glossy and soft. Each one tagged with a tiny strip of parchment tied by thread. One reads Hispania, another Gallia, and a third, striking, ash blonde, Germania. These, Flavia says, are war trophies. You stare. She's serious. She picks up the Germania wig, brushing it fondly. Taken from a raiding camp 3 years ago. My husband brought it back in a box of wine and armor. She holds it to the light. It cost him 2 spears and a busted shield. But I told him it was the best anniversary gift he ever gave me. You're not sure how to respond. And yet, this wasn't unusual. In the Roman Empire, wigs made from enemy hair were a booming business. Especially blonde wigs. Germanic tribes were a favorite target, not just because they lost wars, but because they had the right kind of hair. Long pale, lustrous, just exotic enough to be thrilling, just conquered enough to be legal. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, whether it was a high-class luxury or a more common souvenir from campaigns abroad. What they agree on is this: foreign hair had value, and not just financial. It was symbolic. To wear it was to dominate, to transform, to elevate yourself through another's defeat. You pick up the Gallia wig. It's soft, reddish-brown, smelling faintly of lavender and old smoke. Flavia shrugs. She was probably a servant's daughter, taken after a border skirmish. Poor thing probably didn't even know how much her hair was worth. She says this without cruelty. Just fact. Her cousin enters, already styled, and nods at the wig collection. Oh, the scalp drawer's out again. Are we playing Which Province Am I Today? Don't be rude, Flavia scolds. It's heritage. Heritage, perhaps, but one with a strange twist. These wigs, ripped from distant villages, cleaned and curled and worn like crowns, had become part of Roman womanhood. To look more desirable, more powerful, more Roman, one had to literally don the identity of the other. You ask how often they're worn. Oh, only for parties, says Flavia. Or funerals. Or temple days. Or when the weather's awful and you can't be bothered with braids. She pauses. Or when you want to make someone feel inadequate. You glance at the mirror again. Your own hair, now smoothed and pulled into a simple knot, looks drab by comparison. Average. Roman. It was tempting, this performance of beauty. Not just the dye, or the smell, or the danger, but the transformation. To put on someone else's history and call it fashion. A quirky tidbit. In some elite households, wigs were so numerous that they were stored on shelves labeled by mood. Cheerful, mournful, flirtatious, and yes, menacing. You imagine opening a cabinet and selecting your personality for the day. You reach for a honey blonde wig with delicate ringlets. Flavia stops you. Not that one. That belonged to Lucilla. She died choking on a date pit last winter. You lower it slowly. Outside, a vendor calls out the price of roses. Somewhere down the alley, a flute starts to play. Life hums along, oblivious to the unsettling truth that someone's scalp has been polished into tonight's accessory. There's one wig that catches your eye. It's coarser than the others, dark and streaked with gray. The parchment tag has faded. Flavia frowns. That one's old. Came from the East, I think. My husband said it was looted from a temple, worn by a priestess. She says it with a mix of reverence and guilt. And then, surprisingly, she hands it to you. Try it. You hesitate, but curiosity wins. You fit the piece over your hair, adjusting the weight, smoothing it into place. It smells like myrrh and soot, and as you look into the mirror, something changes. You look older, wiser, sadder, powerful. No jokes this time. No glamour. Just gravity. Flavia nods. I wore that one when I buried my brother. You take it off gently. It's easy to forget that hair holds memory, that each strand tells a story. Love, loss, war, survival. These wigs weren't just ornaments. They were relics. There's a moment of silence. Then Flavia claps her hands, and the mood resets. Enough sentiment. Let's find you something scandalous. I'm in the mood for controversy. She grabs the Hispania wig and hands you a comb dipped in scented oil. You're going to need to tame her first. She's wild. You sit down, smiling, because wild feels about right. And as the comb slides through foreign hair, you realize that in Rome, beauty isn't about honesty. It's about story. And tonight, you get to choose which one to tell. You're standing in a temple now, hair pinned, sandals dusted, trying your best to look solemn while your scalp still smells vaguely like vinegar and ambition. The high priestess is chanting something in low Latin. Incense is coiling lazily toward the rafters, and around you, heads bow, some dyed, some veiled, some covered entirely in stiff ceremonial wigs. You're in the temple of Isis today. And here, hair isn't just fashion, it's theology. From birth to burial, Roman hair had meaning, sacred meaning. The way it was cut, arranged, colored, or covered could whisper messages to the gods, or to your neighbors, which in Rome was pretty much the same thing. Your guide for the day, a stoic older woman named Antonia, has been volunteering here since before your dye burned its first scalp. She explains as she adjusts your veil. When we mourn, we unbraid. When we marry, we twist. When we enter the temple, we cover. Unless you're a priestess, of course, then you get your own style. She points to the woman leading the ritual, her head crowned with carefully sculpted ringlets of black hair, oiled and pinned into a shape that's half eagle, half halo. Historians still argue whether temple hairstyles were codified across the empire or left up to local customs. But one thing is clear, they mattered, just like colors did. Black was considered pious. Golden was divine. Red could go either way, seductive or sacred, depending on your mood. Or the god. And gods had preferences. Take Vesta, goddess of the hearth. Her priestesses were sworn to chastity, and their hair was always bound in 6 plaits, wrapped around the head in a style called the Sani crines. Each twist symbolized a virtue. Chastity, modesty, fire. You're pretty sure one stood for don't talk back, but the scrolls are vague. In contrast, worshippers of Bacchus, the wine god, wore wild curls and headbands made of ivy. No pins, no rules, just chaos and curls. You once heard of a festival where the entire congregation dyed their hair purple with crushed mulberries and ran through the streets, singing and throwing rosewater at strangers. You hope that festival's coming soon. But temples weren't the only sacred places where hair took center stage. Step into any Roman tomb and you'll see it. Carved in marble, painted on plaster, woven into memory. You pass through a narrow alley where a set of funerary reliefs are embedded in the wall. One depicts a young woman with elegantly curled hair, each ringlet meticulously chiseled. The inscription reads, "To Fabia, who never changed her color, even in grief." It's both a compliment and a warning, an assertion of virtue through restraint. Then again, another nearby relief shows a woman named Lavinia, her hair dyed a brilliant shade of black stone, with a note. She lived with fire, she died in style. You like Lavinia already. Romans believed that hair carried identity beyond death. Some families kept locks of hair in urns alongside cremated remains. Others buried women with wigs, pins, and jars of dye, just in case they needed to look respectable in the afterlife. A quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once discovered a sealed Roman tomb containing a perfectly preserved jar of red hair dye. Still capped, still potent, as if someone had planned to use it later. You enter a family crypt beneath a wealthy household. It's quiet, cool, the air thick with centuries. One wall painting shows the matriarch with flaming red hair, seated between her 2 daughters, one blonde, one black-haired, each holding jars. Beneath them, an inscription, Filius coloravit cor sum. She colored her heart into her daughters. Flavia, standing beside you, mutters, or she just liked variety. Either way, the message is clear. Hair wasn't just surface. It was legacy. Back above ground, preparations are beginning for a sacred procession to Juno's temple. You're invited to observe, but only if your appearance is appropriate. That means no flamboyant dye, no wigs, no headbands with suspiciously Greek motifs. You sigh and cover your glorious mess of a head with a simple white veil. Dignity, after all, has rules. Still, as the women line up, some modest, some sneaky, a few with unmistakable streaks of rebellion poking from under their head coverings, you realize that the performance never ends. Even in piety, maybe especially in piety, you catch a glimpse of a teenager adjusting her veil, revealing briefly the edge of golden hair beneath. Her mother swats her gently. Not for Juno, she warns. Save that for Venus. Temples had etiquette. Dyes and wigs could elevate or scandalize, depending on whose statue you were facing. And gods, it turns out, were judgmental. Flavia chuckles. Don't ask what happened to the woman who wore a flame-colored wig to Minerva's festival. Let's just say, the goddess wasn't the only one with a spear. Later that night, as candles flicker in shallow alcoves and prayers rise like mist from every corner of the city, you sit in the garden of Flavia's villa and watch her braid her hair. Slowly, purposefully. Tomorrow is my mother's day, she says. We'll visit her tomb. I'll wear my natural color. She pauses. Or what's left of it. She's not being ironic. You offer to help. She nods. And as you thread your fingers through her hair, thinner now, streaked with gray and stubborn dye, you realize that in this empire of masks and makeovers, there's something radical in being real. Just for a while. The next morning, you find yourself staring at a bronze mirror again. But this time, it's not your reflection that surprises you. It's the man behind it. Gaius, Flavia's brother-in-law, has arrived from the countryside for a Senate meeting. He's in his 50s, dressed in crisp white with just enough jewelry to show he's important, but not tacky. His eyes are sharp. His sandals are shinier than yours. And his hair? Suspiciously youthful. He catches you staring and grins. Ah, caught me. The secret's in the vinegar. You raise an eyebrow. He sits on a low stool, dips a sponge into a small bowl of what looks like wine left out too long, and begins carefully dabbing at the roots near his temples. I've been dyeing this mop for a decade, he says cheerfully. Can't have my fellow senators thinking I've gone soft. You watch as the sponge turns slightly brown. He glances at you. Oh, don't look like that. I'm not vain. I'm strategic. In Rome, male grooming was a complex affair. On the one hand, older men were respected, seen as wise, seasoned, powerful. On the other hand, no one wanted to look like they were decomposing, especially in public. Historians still argue whether Roman men routinely dyed their hair or only did so when aiming to appear younger for political gain, romantic pursuits, or gladiatorial fantasy cosplay. But clearly, Gaius is not alone. He pulls out a second jar, this one labeled in neat cursive, and applies a dark mixture around his beard. This one's walnut shell and soot, he says. Works wonders, unless it rains. You stifle a smile. There was a senator once, he continues, who went to court wearing fresh dye. Mid-speech, a drop of sweat rolled down his temple and turned blue. Everyone tried not to laugh. He lost the case. You're not surprised. Back in the day, darker hair was seen as masculine, virile, and authoritative. Gray? That was respectable. Yes, but only if you earned it, preferably through war or scandal. Premature graying? Bad genetics. Or worse, bad karma. So men like Gaius turned to a variety of tricks. Vinegar to revitalize roots. Boiled bark to deepen browns. Lead-based formulas that could turn the scalp a slightly terrifying shade of plum. A quirky tidbit. Emperor Augustus, ever concerned with image, supposedly plucked his grays instead of dyeing them. His successor, Tiberius, dyed everything, and then banned others from doing so because, well, emperors. Gaius, unlike Augustus, clearly prefers chemical warfare. He invites you to try some. You politely decline. He shrugs. Suit yourself. But don't come crying when the girls at the forum start calling you uncle. You sit back and observe his technique. He uses a fine brush for detail work. Not a hair out of place. This isn't vanity. It's ritual. Control. And it's not just him. Outside, you pass barbershops where men sit in reclining chairs as young apprentices trim, oil, and tint. It's all very discreet. There are no flashy wigs or peacock feathers, just whispered instructions and a silent agreement to pretend everything is natural. You spot a young merchant dipping a cloth in coal ash behind a pillar. His hands are stained. His expression is sheepish. You nod in solidarity. The stigma for men was subtle but strong. A man seen fussing too much over his appearance risked being called effeminate, a serious insult in a culture that prized stoicism and sweaty armor. But if he let himself go entirely, laughed at, pitted, forgotten, it was a narrow path. Even poets got in on it. Marshall, always ready with a jab, once mocked a man for having hair black as a raven and hands blacker still. The implication? If your dye job stains your fingers, at least don't touch the bread. Back at the villa, Gaius inspects his finished look. He smooths his curls, adds a bit of oil for shine, and nods. Better, he says. Now I won't look like my own father. You chuckle. Then he leans in, drops his voice, and says, Truth is, I started all this after Livia died. You pause. She always said I looked like a god when I was young. I didn't believe her. But after she passed, I started believing it mattered. He taps the jar. This? It's not for the Senate. It's for me. It's a surprisingly tender confession. And it makes you think, maybe dye isn't just disguise. Maybe it's defiance. A refusal to surrender to time, to decay, to loss. A way of saying, I'm still here. As you walk with Gaius to the forum later, the street is buzzing with politicians, clients, and criers. Everyone seems a little too polished, a little too eager. You notice more than one suspiciously youthful head of hair bobbing through the crowd. A nobleman passes you with a perfectly dark mane and a gray beard. Forgot something, Gaius mutters under his breath. You laugh. The day rolls on. Gaius argues in court. He wins. He smiles. His hair, perfectly dark, catches the sun just right. And in that moment, you realize, in Rome, youth isn't just a phase. It's a costume. And sometimes, the dye is what keeps the man alive. It's a warm evening in Rome, and you're sitting on a balcony draped in linen, sipping wine that tastes like overripe ambition. Below you, the street glows gold in the lamplight. A poet performs in the square. A lyre twangs in the distance. Somewhere, someone's goat is misbehaving again. Beside you sits Marcia. Not a Marcia, the Marcia. The same one who used to lounge in palace gardens as the mistress of a provincial magistrate, and who now sits across from the empress at banquets. Her hair is a rich amber now, curled, pinned, and quietly perfect. You know what they called me when I first arrived in Rome? She asks, swirling her cup. Rustica. Country girl. You raise an eyebrow. She smirks. They didn't say it as a compliment. Too dark, too plain. My accent. Apparently, it could curdle cheese. I was meant to serve wine, not drink it. She pauses, leans back, and sighs. So I bought a wig. And just like that, you're pulled into one of the empire's favorite fables. The rise of the courtesan turned queen. Or at least, power-adjacent. Marcia's story isn't rare, but her survival is. She'd started as a servant in a merchant's household in Capua. Her hair then? Unremarkable. Mouse brown. Frizzy. Local. But her eyes? Sharp. Her instincts? Lethal. One evening, a traveling hair merchant arrived with a trunk of foreign wigs and dyes. While others picked feathers or perfumes, Marcia chose a golden wig from Britannia, laced with iron filings to hold shape. The merchant said it was cursed. Marcia said, Good. So am I. Historians still argue whether it was her beauty, her wit, or her sheer force of will that launched her up the social ladder. But what no one debates is this. The night she dyed her eyebrows to match that wig, her fate changed. She laughs, remembering. I looked ridiculous, but powerful, and that was enough. A visiting landowner took her to Rome. There, she learned fast. How to walk, talk, flirt, flatter. How to wear the right shade at the right time. How to bleach her roots before the Senate's wives saw her. You ask if it ever felt false. She shrugs. It was false, but it worked. Over time, Marcia crafted a new self. Her golden hair became her signature, visible from across the forum. It shimmered under oil lamps, danced under moonlight, made other women nervous, made men write poetry. Terrible poetry, but still. She opens a small lacquered box and shows you a bundle of cut hair, real, honeyed blonde. Mine now, she says. I had it dyed to match the wig. Took 3 months of vinegar and burnt lemon peels. Nearly melted my scalp. Worth it. That's the thing about hair in Rome. It wasn't just appearance. It was armor, strategy, class mobility in strands. A quirky tidbit. There was once a law proposed to limit access to luxury wigs to women of moral standing. It failed, of course, mostly because too many senators' mistresses wore them. But it proves how visible the transformation had become. And Marcia? She leaned into it. At banquets, she began to match her hair to her dress. Rose gold with silk, icy flax with pearls. People started copying her. The wives of generals sent for the same dyes. One even tried to replicate her curls using heated bronze rods, an early curling iron. She burned a hole in her veil. You lean forward. What happened to the merchant? Marcia smiles. I bought him. You blink. Not him, she clarifies, his business. His recipe book. His client list. He works for me now. Last I heard, he was teaching a parrot to say mistress of style. You try not to laugh, whine out your nose. Marcia stands, adjusts her draped stola, and walks to the edge of the balcony. Her hair gleams. Her shadow is long. The right shade, she says softly, can open the right door. You think of all the women who never got through those doors, who died, curled, cut, and polished, and still remained unseen. Marcia turns. You know what I realized? Beauty fades, but memory doesn't. Make them remember your silhouette, your scent, your color. Then, almost absently, she adds, I haven't worn my natural hair in 20 years. I wouldn't recognize it. You imagine what it must be like, peeling off the image after so long. What's left underneath? And maybe that's the cost. Reinvention comes with forgetting. She didn't just climb the ranks. She colored herself into someone else. But would she do it again? She nods at your unspoken question. In a heartbeat, she says. But I'd go red this time. Something outrageous. Like lava. A poet walks by in the street below and stops to look up. Marcia, he calls. You've set the moon on fire. She waves him off. He used to write that to Claudia last season. Just change the name. And yet, she smiles. Because in Rome, even borrowed verses count if they're said loud enough. The next morning, you're woken up not by sunlight or songbirds, but by the unmistakable plop of something falling from a high shelf, followed by a muffled curse and the smell of sulfur. You groggily sit up and peek through the doorway into Flavia's study. She's kneeling over a scroll, squinting at faded ink by lamplight, while her cousin hovers nearby with a dripping bowl of something disturbingly purple. I found another one, her cousin shouts, holding up the scroll like a prize chicken. A real recipe from the Domus Aurea, the emperor's own beauty blend. Flavia groans. If it involves snails again, I swear. You rub your eyes and shuffle in. The table is littered with fragments of parchment, wax tablets, broken quills, and a mortar that smells like punishment. Welcome, Flavia says flatly, to Disasters in Dye, volume 146. You glance at the top of the scroll. It reads, Capillum de Corar sine lacrimis. Roughly, how to beautify hair without crying. Comforting. Apparently, this is one of many Roman how-to manuals on personal grooming. They circulated like gossip, passed from villa to villa, copied by hand, and often edited with dramatic flair. Everyone wanted to discover the miracle blend that would make their curls bounce like Venus or burn like Apollo's chariot. Most were probably written by bored physicians, stylists trying to upsell products, or pranksters with access to ink. Flavia gestures to the next scroll. This one recommends powdered frog skin, fox bile, and a drop of your own blood, applied on the first night of a full moon. You blink. She shrugs. It's not the weirdest one. Her cousin chimes in, reading dramatically from another page. Mix equal parts goose fat, powdered alabaster, and ashes from a funeral pyre, a recent one, to lighten the hair and summon favor from Venus. Summon what now? You ask. Favor, she repeats. Or possibly a ghost. The Latin is a little vague. Historians still argue whether these beauty scrolls were treated seriously or more as household entertainment. Some families read them the way modern people read horoscopes or cookbooks they never intend to use. Aspirational, mildly ridiculous, and good for a laugh. But others tried them. Really tried them. There's a story of a senator's wife who followed a recipe involving fermented barley and owl feathers, convinced it would give her curls the sheen of moonlight. She ended up bald for 3 weeks. Her husband still jokes about it. She does not. One particularly infamous scroll promises to cure baldness with the following blend: crushed mouse droppings, fish brine, olive oil, and, wait for it, charred bee wings. Applied nightly, covered with linen, recited over with a love poem. Did it work? Absolutely not. Did people try it anyway? Obviously. A quirky tidbit. One Roman scroll suggests a test strand method, cutting a small lock of your hair, dyeing it first, and waiting 3 days to observe the results. So even 2,000 years ago, someone was yelling, "Always patch test first," into the void. Flavia pulls open a drawer and hands you a tiny bronze spoon encrusted with dried herbs. "This," she says reverently, "is from the Amulet of Andromeda series, meant to bring brilliance and fertility." You try not to ask how that combination works. Another scroll claims to have been dictated by the Oracle of Delphi, although the handwriting suggests it was more likely scribbled by a very drunk man with access to a fish market and a lot of confidence. Still, some ingredients actually did have cosmetic merit. Vinegar, lemon, and certain minerals can lighten hair. Ashes provide pigment, and oils like almond or laurel help protect strands from the harsh Roman sun. There's even a decent detangling recipe buried among the nonsense. Olive oil, fig juice, and a touch of honey. Smells awful. Works wonders. You ask if Flavia's ever made a real disaster. She smiles. Once tried a recipe from Alexandria that claimed to give waves like the Nile. I misread the amounts. Ended up with curls like a cursed sheep. Her cousin bursts out laughing. And your scalp turned green. Only for a week, Flavia insists. Despite the madness, there's something admirable about it all. The experimentation, the hope, the sheer chaos of trusting a scroll that casually mentions goat spit as a base ingredient. You try a mixture yourself, carefully. 1 part wine lees, the leftover sediment, 1 part barley flour, and a pinch of saffron. Supposedly adds sun-kissed brilliance. It feels like smearing porridge on your head. Smells like old socks and ambition. But you do it. For science. As you wait for it to set, Flavia reads aloud from her favorite scroll. The recipe starts with, "If you wish to cause envy," and ends with, "Then bathe in goat milk and walk backwards under the stars." Honestly, it's not the worst advice you've heard. The dye hardens. You rinse. The results? Debatable. Your hair looks slightly shinier. Or maybe wetter. You're not sure. But you feel accomplished, which, in Roman terms, might be all that counts. Later that evening, the scrolls are re-rolled, the bowls washed, and the weird purple mixture that started it all is fed to a very curious goose. You lie back on a cushion, hair still damp, wondering what other nonsense secrets are hidden in Rome's dusty drawers. Because in a world without internet tutorials or salon certifications, trial and error was the name of the game. And if that meant occasionally summoning a minor household deity by accident, well, at least your hair would look interesting while it happened. You're back in the public baths today, towel slung loosely around your shoulders, sandals squeaking softly against the mosaic floor. Steam billows through the arches, muffling voices into distant murmurs. This isn't just a place to wash away the grime of the Forum. It's where Rome's real politics unfold, and where fashion meets fire. You settle onto a bench, watching as a cluster of elegantly dressed women enters the tepidarium, laughing behind fans, hair perfectly arranged and dyed with shades that would give a sunrise identity crisis. One has streaks of amber and violet. Another boasts a cascade of deep burgundy ringlets. All carefully curated. All screaming, "I have money." And also, taste is subjective. Then, enter the matroni. You can feel the temperature drop even before the water does. They march in with regal authority. Older, wealthier, draped in simple but aggressively expensive stolas. Their hair is darker, more reserved. Pinned, not piled. Natural, or dyed in dignified tones. Nothing too flashy, nothing too courtesan. And then, the air shifts. Because one of the younger women with golden hair has dared to wear a twisted hairstyle that very closely resembles a style favored by Empress Livia. One of the matrons leans in and whispers, audibly enough for everyone to hear. How generous of her to imitate greatness. Poor thing must be terribly insecure. The younger woman freezes. Someone coughs to hide a laugh. The message is clear. In Rome, dye wasn't just aesthetic, it was ammunition. You slide a little lower into the steam. Historians still debate how sharply these class lines were enforced. But what's beyond question is that appearance was political. Hair dye was a way to signal class, but also to challenge it. The wrong shade on the wrong woman, a declaration of rebellion, or worse, ignorance. And if you were from a new family, recently rich, dye could make or break you. Flavia told you once about a woman named Severa, daughter of a wealthy freedman, who dyed her hair silver blue and began hosting salons for poets. The elite ridiculed her, nicknamed her Moon Skull, and spread a rumor that her dye came from donkey urine. True or not, it stuck. But that didn't stop women like Severa. If anything, they doubled down, wearing imported wigs, dyeing their hair golden even in mourning, sponsoring statues with elaborate hairstyles no sculptor wanted to recreate twice. One quirky tidbit: Roman graffiti wasn't just politics and poetry. It also included insults, often about hair. On a wall in Pompeii, someone scrawled, "Livia wears her hair like a peacock and smells like fish sauce." Harsh, and oddly specific. Back in the bath, someone mentions Flavia's name. You perk up. She used to dye her hair pink, one woman says, before she married into money. Another nods. I heard she once hosted a Saturnalia banquet with her hair shaped like a Minerva helmet, in gold. A third shrugs. At least she owns it. I'd rather that than someone who pretends to be natural and still smells like vinegar. You hear more splashing than laughter. Suddenly, everyone looks at you. You freeze mid-sip from your clay cup. You're a friend of Flavia, aren't you? One asks. You tried her concoction last week. You nod. Carefully. Brave. Another says, arching a brow. She's always been creative. The mood teeters. But then someone else chuckles. Honestly, I admire her. I couldn't keep a dye pot alive to save my life. My last one turned my eyebrows green. Everyone laughs. Crisis averted. For now, the women start exchanging recipes, trading horror stories, bragging about access to Syrian myrrh oils and Egyptian henna. It becomes a ritual of status and survival. Who has the best ingredients? Who's imported what? Who burned off whose fringe last spring? Flavia's name comes up again, this time more admiring. At least she doesn't pretend, one says. Not like Julia, who wears German hair and pretends it grows in Etruria. You can't help but smile. It's a battlefield here, but one where the weapons are paste and pigment. Later, as you're being scrubbed with a loofah that feels like a declaration of war, you realize something else. The public baths were equalizers in theory, but subtle hierarchies still ran deep. Elite women used rare dyes, imported oils, carried silver combs. Their slaves were trained in mixing and layering, not just applying. Their gossip was filtered through veiled insults and studied eyebrow lifts. Lower classes? They used soot, chalk, maybe some vinegar if they were lucky. Their beauty routines were faster, rougher, and far more likely to end with someone crying over a bowl. One woman nearby is rinsing her hair in wine. Someone scoffs. Red wine only stains. You need vinegar and ash. But I like the smell. Then marry a grape. Arguments break out. Someone throws a sponge. You escape before it escalates to sandal throwing. Outside the bathhouse, the air is cooler, the sky dusky. You run your fingers through your damp hair, catching the faint scent of fig oil and toasted barley. A strange combo, but very Roman. You pass a market stall where a girl is arguing with a vendor over the price of alum powder. She holds her coin purse like it's her last breath. The vendor sighs, drops the price, and she grins. Maybe she's saving up to look like the senator's daughter. Or maybe just to not be mocked in the tepidarium. Either way, she's playing the same game. Because in Rome, it's not about who you are. It's about who you're willing to look like, and how well you can pull it off without flinching. Later that week, you find yourself seated uncomfortably close to a sweating physician who smells like boiled onions and ambition. His name is Marcus, and he insists on being called Master of Follicular Arts. He is, without a doubt, Rome's most enthusiastic hair scientist. He also just set a bowl on fire. Controlled burn, he says, waving the smoke away with a reed fan, to awaken the essence of the myrtle ash. You nod slowly. The spoon you're holding is starting to melt. Marcus, despite appearances, is actually well known in Rome's beauty circuits. Part stylist, part healer, part mystic, he combines natural science with equal parts optimism and fire hazard. Today, he's promised to explain the why behind Roman hair dye. The chemistry, the magic, the mystery. You're skeptical. He begins by lecturing about pigment particles and porosity, words you're sure he made up, before diving into the ancient belief that hair was a kind of spiritual antenna. To change its color? That was to change your destiny. You wonder how many destinies have been changed by leech paste and goat dung. Marcus dips his fingers into a jar of black sludge. This, he announces proudly, is the perfect Roman black. Soot, olive oil, crushed ants, and a hint of copper filings. The ants, he adds solemnly, add sheen. You stare at the jar, and then at him. He continues, for blonde, you want ash of tamarisk wood mixed with vinegar, sometimes with saffron. Heat is key. Apply in sunlight. The chemical reaction opens the follicle. He pauses, then grins. Also, it makes the scalp tingle. People love that. Historians still argue whether these combinations were based on experimentation or inherited superstition. The ingredients changed by region, and their success varied widely. In Gaul, women used lye and clay. In Egypt, henna and natron. In Rome, anything that wouldn't kill you immediately was fair game. Marcus shows you a chalkboard sketch of a hair strand. It's labeled with terms like ether socket and pigment spiral. You ask if these are standard medical terms. He looks offended. A quirky tidbit he proudly shares. Some stylists believe that whispering compliments to the dye while mixing it made it more effective. You look radiant, he murmurs to a simmering pot. Everyone will notice you. Then he winks. You're not sure if the potion feels better, but you do. He leads you to his garden, where he grows dye herbs in neat rows. Woad, madder, indigo, rosemary, sage. It's not just about covering gray, he says. It's about layering identity. You ask if any of his clients have had bad reactions. He sighs. Many. One woman fainted from the fumes. Another grew a rash shaped like the Colosseum. My proudest case. He shows you a thick book of notes and sketches, detailed logs of dye attempts, scalp conditions, and emotional responses. One entry reads, Client, Lucilla. Desired color, goddess gold. Actual result, chartreuse terror. Mood, unstable. Still, Marcus is passionate, and sometimes strangely persuasive. He crushes walnuts for their oil, boils rose petals for scent, shaves bronze for glitter. Modern dyes, he scoffs, are lazy. They lack soul. You ask if any dye is truly permanent. Not unless you include divine intervention, he says. Or lead. But we try not to use lead anymore. Too many hallucinations. Too late. You remember that several of Flavia's earlier experiments might have had a lead base. You make a mental note to avoid any conversations with statues for the next few days. Marcus places a wig on a stand and begins applying a new paste, red ochre, wine sediment, egg yolk, and alum. It smells edible. This, he says dramatically, will shine like a sunrise over the Tiber. You ask how he knows. He tilts his head. I don't. That's why I'm testing it on the goat first. Sure enough, a goat tied under the awning is already sporting a curious splash of pink across its back. He pats the goat. She's very patient, and she glows beautifully at dusk. You try not to make eye contact with the goat. Back in the workshop, you help him mix a batch labeled Sea Goddess No. 7. It's minty, slightly metallic, and bubbles ominously. He eyes your hair. Want to try it? You hesitate. He shrugs. Your loss. The goat's gonna look stunning. Later that evening, you're still thinking about his words, layering identity. Because under the comedy, under the trial and error of ancient science, that's what this all really is. Dye isn't just color. It's code. It says, I am this today, and maybe, I am not that anymore. You pass a mirror and see your reflection, a little flushed from heat, a little frizzed from humidity, a little humbled by goat-based chemistry. But wiser. Because now, you know the science behind the shine. And that sometimes, to find yourself, you have to smear some wine and powdered ants on your head and see what happens next. The sun is high again, and you're walking through the older district of Rome, where the buildings lean in slightly, as if eavesdropping. The streets here are narrower, the stones worn smooth by thousands of sandals, and every wall feels like it's watched centuries of bad decisions and worse dye jobs. You've come to visit a friend of Flavia's, an artist named Nerva, who carves busts and paints frescoes for wealthy patrons. His workshop is tucked between a perfumery and a place that might be selling grilled eels or possibly old shoes. You're not sure. Inside, The walls are lined with half-finished sculptures and sketches of hairstyles in charcoal. Clay heads sit on shelves, each topped with tiny modeled wigs, braids, buns, waves, curls so elaborate you suspect divine involvement. Nerva greets you with red fingers and a chalk-dusted tunic. "Ah, welcome. I'm just finishing a commission for a senator's wife. She wants her statue to look young. And by young, she means blonde." He shows you the marble bust, a woman frozen mid-glance, eyes proud, lips firm. Her curls have been carefully carved into place. And the hair? Already stained with yellow ochre and a thin wash of clay-tinted pigment. "You wouldn't believe how much time we spend painting hair," he says. "People think the statues were all white. They weren't. They were fabulous." He leads you to a back wall, where frescoes are drying. Images of women reclining, standing, preening, laughing. Hair dyed in vivid hues, copper, black, sun gold. Some are wearing wigs. Some are stylized into impossible shapes. All of them are idealized. Nerva sighs. It's exhausting. No one wants to look like themselves anymore. They want to look like someone they think they're supposed to be. Historians still argue how much of this imagery reflected real life versus idealized fantasy. But these paintings and sculptures were powerful. They shaped how people saw beauty. They were filters before filters. And hair dye? Eternal. Nerva pulls out a tile depicting a street scene. A woman walks past a dye merchant's stall, her hair streaked with green and gold. It's exaggerated, yes, but not by much. "She's real," he says. "I saw her last month in the Forum. Looked like a parrot. Fabulous." A quirky tidbit. Some Roman homes included tiny wall paintings in their cubiculum, bedrooms, showing women at their toilette, applying dye, brushing wigs. A kind of Instagram story, but immortalized in plaster. You ask how artists picked which colors to use. He shrugs. Some from memory, some from instruction, some from what the client thinks they looked like 30 years ago. He holds up a jar of pigment. This one's cinnabar. Beautiful red. Toxic as Hades. You lean away. He grins. "Don't worry, I only use it for enemies." You watch him apply thin lines of gold to another bust's curls. "Symbolic," he says. Even if her hair was gray, she wanted to be remembered as radiant. That's the crux of it, isn't it? Dye wasn't just for now. It was for later. For memory. For legacy. To make sure you looked magnificent. Forever. In the afternoon, you follow Nerva into a private garden where several tomb markers are lined up for restoration. One in particular catches your eye, a stone slab carved with a woman's portrait. Her hair is dyed black, pinned high, curls cascading like a waterfall. The inscription reads, "Julia, who never let time take her color." He chuckles. She paid double for that line. I hope time appreciates it. You look at her stone face and wonder what she really looked like. If her scalp ever burned. If she whispered to her dye paste. If she laughed when it went green. Nerva shrugs. Art lies, but it lies beautifully. He shows you a statue from an abandoned villa, badly chipped, partially faded. But the hair? Still faintly red. 2,000 years later. Ochre and wine pigment, most likely. He points. That's not marble, friend. That's attitude. Outside, the day is cooling. You walk together through the Forum, past fountains and pillars, frescoed taverns and carved gods. Everywhere you look, you see hints of hair. In mosaics, on statues, etched into rings, pressed into coins. Even the emperors weren't immune. Nero had his curls immortalized in bronze. Claudius commissioned busts where his receding hairline was filled in. Domitian allegedly forced artists to carve him with more volume than the laws of nature allowed. It wasn't just women who died and pretended and posed. It was everyone. Because in Rome, fashion didn't fade. It fossilized. Later, back at Flavia's villa, you find her lounging with her cousin, both sipping something floral and potent, their hair pinned in identical spirals. Did Nerva tell you the story about the statue that refused to hold pigment? You shake your head. She grins. He spent weeks trying to dye the marble. Nothing worked. Turned out, the hair had been carved too smooth. No texture. It just slipped off. You nod. Even stone gets tired. She clinks her cup against yours. To dye that lasts. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, lamplight, and the scent of oil and ash, you realize something. They weren't afraid of fading. They were afraid of being forgotten. So they left color behind. You wake to thunder. Not from the sky, Rome's weather remains suspiciously perfect, but from the pounding of feet on stone outside Flavia's villa, the servants are in a frenzy, sweeping, trimming, polishing bronze fixtures. There's a certain urgency in the air that suggests something big is about to change. You shuffle to the atrium, hair unbrushed, toga slightly crooked. Flavia's already dressed, sitting perfectly still as her maid applies oil to her curls with practiced rhythm. Her hair is no longer gold, not black, not red, but something in between. A gentle, warm brown with glints of copper, like autumn in the shade. "I'm retiring the gold," she says without turning. "It's time." You blink. "Why?" She shrugs. "The empire is shifting. The fashion is softening. Everyone's tired of trying so hard." There's truth in her voice. It's subtle, but Rome is indeed changing. The dye stalls are still open, but fewer people are crowding them. The scroll copyists aren't copying beauty manuals. They're back to recording philosophy. Even the forums feel quieter, less obsessed with the newest shade of cinnabar or whose wig was seen slipping at Saturnalia. The age of hair drama is dimming. Historians still argue whether it was Christian influence, political exhaustion, or just cyclical taste, but sometime near the end of the Roman Empire, the fever for follicular flamboyance cooled. Flavia combs her fingers through her newly neutral hair and smiles. "We were all peacocks once. But even peacocks need to molt." You nod. It's not that dyeing ended. It just shifted, became less theatrical, more practical. Hair returned to natural tones. Braids grew simpler. The goddess wigs were boxed up. The exotic shades were retired. And with them, something else faded too. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of it all. The joy of risking your scalp for glamour. The scandalous delight of showing up to temple with fire-red hair and a grin. The whispered recipes. The goat-dyed lavender for testing. The laughter. You remember Marcia on the balcony, talking about doors opened by golden strands. Gaius darkening his roots with vinegar to keep up in the Senate. Ione, silent and deft, mixing dye like medicine. Marcus and his goat laboratory. Nerva, painting pigment onto marble curls. They were all part of something bigger. Hair wasn't just fashion, it was identity. And now, as Rome softens into its next phase, more conservative, more inward, you feel the loss. But also the grace. Because even if the wigs are put away, the stories linger. In memory, in stone, in that faint copper glint that still catches the light in Flavia's hair. Later, you walk through the streets one last time. You see a girl in the shadow of a column, grinding rust with a small mortar. She looks up, surprised, then smiles. "It's for my mother," she says. "She used to wear gold. I want to remember." And that's the thing. Fashions fade. But dye? Dye stains. You pass a crumbling wall where someone once painted a fresco of a woman with pale blonde curls. The image is faded. Her dress is almost gone. But her hair still gleams. Eternal. And now, as the lamps dim and the streets of ancient Rome grow quiet, you settle back into yourself. Your scalp cools, the scent of vinegar fades, and your thoughts soften like wax in warmth. The dyes have dried. The wigs have been boxed away. The laughter of the bathhouse is just a whisper now. Even Flavia sleeps, her hair wrapped loosely, no longer chasing gods in gold. You trace the thread backward, from fashion to fire, from leeches to laurel oil, from the daring blaze of identity to the slow fade of tradition. And as each moment drifts further behind, you realize that all of it, every scandalous streak, every whispered recipe, was a way of saying I was here. So you close your eyes, knowing that somewhere beneath the layers of time and ash, those colors still shimmer. On stone, in scrolls, in the memory of hands that braided, mixed, and whispered to boiling pots under a moonlit sky. Tonight, you don't need dye. You don't need wigs. You've walked the streets of the empire, worn a crown of pigeon dung, laughed with rebels, whispered with ghosts. And now, your story rests with theirs. Let it settle. Let it stay. Breathe in. Breathe out. The forum is quiet. The dye pots are still. Your scalp is safe. And sleep is near. Sweet dreams.